Currently, I'm a junior in high school, and as of this time, the events of this story happened just this last September 2019. When I graduated middle school, I was hit with the reality that I was going to have to go to high school that was, for a lack of a better phrase, not up to my standards. I know that makes me sound completely pretentious, but due to my family's current economic situation, I was not able to go to my desired school. Anyways, as soon as freshman year started, I noticed the difference in education between me and my classmates, but it didn't let that bother me. For the most part, I made friends quite fast. However, some people in my classes always threw me a nasty look, no matter what I did. You see, I take a lot of pride in my English because, in my opinion, it's really good and almost indistinguishable from a native English speaker. And I take any chance I get to use it. Since I come from Mexico, a lot of people, while speaking English but don't exactly dominate the language, look down on English speakers, at least where I'm from. So ever since I use it in class, a lot of people look at me weird except for this one guy, Pedro. Pedro was always a weird one. He was the cliché quiet kid who sat at the back of the room with his hoodie up and rarely spoke to anybody, except for me. He had a sort of fascination with me, especially my English. Every time we talked, which was mostly when we were assigned as teammates for a project, he wanted to speak in English, even if the class that we were in wasn't English. At first, I thought it was silly, flattering even, but then he became more obsessive with it. And when we were paired up, he would refuse to work unless I spoke to him in English, and sometimes would even destroy our work if I stopped talking in English. I drew the line after we got paired up for our final project. Halfway through the final project, I told Pedro a specific instruction, but he didn't understand me. So I repeated it, but he still didn't get it. So I told it to him in Spanish, and that's when he flipped out at me and started cursing his lungs out in the middle of class. He then grabbed my computer, deleted our file, which mind you had 10 pages of our chem project, and then dropped my computer on the ground. I was furious, but before I could really do anything, the teacher stepped in and said that she could take it from there. They talked outside for a couple of periods and then came back in. My teacher told me that Pedro just got carried away in the moment, and that he would no longer pair up with me on projects. But that was not enough for me. The kid destroyed my computer, for God's sake. So I stormed into the principal's office and demanded that he would be expelled. The teacher naturally found that to be a little excessive, and in hindsight it probably was, but she said that something definitely had to be done. The next day, Pedro didn't come to class, and the principal later informed me that he had been transferred to another classroom. And that's where it stopped, for a while at least. On the last day before summer break, Pedro approached me. He said that he was really sorry about freaking out and breaking my laptop, and it felt really genuine, so I forgave him, and that was that. However, once I got home, he started blowing up my phone. While I had forgiven him, I really had no interest in being his friend, so I ignored his text messages all day, and once night came, I went to sleep. I awoke to 73 missed calls from Pedro, all between 3:30 and 4:50 in the morning, and that was enough to freak me out and respond to his text. As I read through them, they started out normalish. Hi, hey, what's up? And then the greeting quickly turned into text like, why aren't you answering? Answer me, and why are you ignoring me? After a couple texts of him saying that I was ignoring him, he stopped. Until the early hours of the morning. You are the freaking worst. You ruined my life. You're making me do this. Once I read those, I immediately blocked him everywhere that I could. The last that I heard from him for the summer was a crying phone call he made a couple days later from a different phone. Once school had resumed, I quickly figured out that Pedro was, once again, in all of my classes. So, once again, I went to the principal and got him removed from my classes. The story repeats here. I ignored Pedro at school, have him move to another class, and he finds a way to spam my phone with obscene messages. Most of the ones that he sends me are these same ones that he sent during the summertime, except for the only one that managed to freak me out, and you probably know what it is. I know where you live. That one sentence was enough for me to go to the principal and finally get him expelled, with months of harassing messages to help prove my point. As soon as I got him expelled, I changed my number and I deleted all my social media just to be safe. 1 week later, I was home alone when I heard someone banging at my door. I looked through the upstairs window, but I didn't see anyone at the door. I looked around the surrounding area of my house and I saw a figure, all in black, standing about 20 feet from my front door. This all took place at night. Not wanting to risk it, I called the police and my parents. By the time the police came, the figure was gone, and that was the last I've seen of Pedro. I don't even know if that was him or not, but it would be too crazy of a coincidence if it wasn't. I'm not quite sure how to even start this story. A lot of things I've experienced never really fit the subreddit's guidelines until yesterday, when this story wormed its way into my head again. This story happened when I started a new school in the middle of 6th grade. I'm 19 now. This was technically my first middle school, and for many reasons, I transferred out. This definitely didn't help. About halfway through, I was switched into Spanish to finish out the year. I had almost always had a foreign language class, so I thought it would be a pretty easy grade to end with. There was a lot of buzz surrounding the Spanish teacher, Mr. D, and when I first saw him and how he acted, I thought I could tell why. He was a pretty eccentric guy who, if you only heard his voice and weren't looking at his stern face, you would think that he was pretty jovial. He almost always pronounced our names wrong, and had this gigantic windmill on wheels in the corner of his room. The windmill reminded me that I had actually heard about this teacher from an older boy called Jay in my Sunday school class. It's weird how things can change so much in a number of years. I remember telling him that I was going to his school. My mom and I had run away in the middle of the 6th grade year, and I would start at my new school after Christmas break had ended. It was nice to know that I at least had a couple people that I knew, so I asked if he could tell me about the school, or if he had any advice. Jay told me that if I had ever got Mr. D, to transfer out immediately. It sounded a little bit dramatic, but as we got more acquainted with Mr. D, so did he get more acquainted with us. One thing that always made us all uncomfortable was how he would rub chapstick on his lips fairly aggressively for like a minute, which was definitely made worse when he would stand with one leg resting on something and his crotch leaning forward. Sure, it was pretty uncomfortable, but not the worst thing in the world, just a bit odd. Have you ever seen a woman with her boobs rested on a desk? Sometimes it's on purpose and sometimes it's an accident, especially when you're short and sitting down. Mr. D started to do this, but with his. He would stand close to a desk to look at their work, but his bulge would be laying on their desk. He wasn't that tall, so he had to stretch a little to do it. But given how strange he already seemed to be, I brushed it off as him not being self-aware. I just feel bad for the first row. Flash forward, and all of his little idiosyncrasies seemed to be more prominent as the days marched on. I remember once he even answered his phone and carried his conversation on a bit before stepping out of class. I should note, he wasn't a great teacher. He wasn't even a good teacher. English obviously wasn't his first language, which was fine because he was there to teach Spanish. Unfortunately, he didn't speak Spanish either. He would always use the school PC to pull up Spanish videos on YouTube for us, and would mindlessly stare at his personal laptop. Like I said, a pretty easy class. I just feel bad for the other students who didn't already know certain things when the test came. We walked in one day, and on my desk, the chair in front of mine and the desk in front of mine, there is a semi-straight line of off-white liquid. It was mainly on my desk and thinned out across the chair and desk in front. Mr. D came over not quite fast enough as the kid behind me asked what it was. All he got was nothing, as he very quickly wiped it away with his hand and rubbed it on his pants. He couldn't say water because it wasn't clear. It really only looked like one thing, but there wasn't any way to definitively prove it was. I tucked my hands in my sleeves and I did my best not to touch the desk. About a week after that, I came into my English class I had at the end of the day to hear one of the girls having a pretty loud argument with our English teacher. I walked in at the middle, but the girl, Megan, was extremely upset and asking why she shouldn't go to the principal. Megan was a bit of a hothead, sure, but she was a really nice girl. I couldn't see her dramatizing a situation this much. I later found out what happened from my best friend at the time, who was in Mr. D's class when it went down. Their class was ahead of us, so their test was scheduled for that day. After the papers were passed around, Mr. D went back to zoning out on his laptop until Megan needed to ask a question. She had had her hand up for ages and he never noticed, so she went over to where he was and freaked out on him. He was watching you know what with the sound off on the laptop that he always brought with him and gave all his attention to. So when I came in, Megan was being reprimanded for being pretty verbal with Mr. D. Our teacher was basically telling her that she shouldn't have been so upset with the teacher doing that in class, and that it's his laptop as if that nullifies anything. Looking back, it explains so much of his shifty behavior. The junk rest on my desk, the hardcore stares, the personal laptop all the time, and the definite white stuff on our desks. It wasn't the first time that he had done it, and it wouldn't have been the last time if he hadn't got suspended for the rest of the month. Mr. D disappeared and we had a sub finish out the rest of the year with us. I got the heck out of that school after everything that had happened there, but still kept in touch with a couple friends who went. They told me that Mr. D was back, but for a while was the gym teacher and the co-soccer coach, and then the next year taught English. I really want to say it surprises me that he was brought back, even without knowing anything about what he teaches, but it doesn't. In hindsight, that school was atrocious. I have so many memories of bad things that students and teachers alike did. Another teacher was only given a suspension for actively looking up girls' skirts. It's just concerning to know that Mr. D probably still works there. This happened when I was a sophomore in high school. I used to take a private bus to school and back. However, when it came to dropping me off at home, I was always the last one because I lived a little bit outside of my school district. My bus driver couldn't drop me off after dropping everyone in my school up because she had to pick up the elementary school kids. As a high schooler, we left school much earlier. So, I either had to wait for her to drop every elementary school kid off, or I could just walk home from the elementary school. It was pretty close to my house. It was only about a 10-minute walking distance. I would walk home every day from that stop. On one particular day, I got off the bus that would park behind the school's field in the back and I started walking towards this adjacent parking lot. The school is located in front of a very busy street that was connected to the highway, and in front of the school, there is a shopping mall. I always wore headphones to avoid the noise of the busy street while I was walking home. When I got to the other parking lot, a small white car had pulled up and the guy inside it started calling out to me. I usually ignore everyone that tries to talk to me when I'm walking home, but I accidentally made eye contact, so I decided to see what he wanted. I didn't notice it then, but looking back, the man was acting very strange. He was sort of jumpy and sweaty. His car was old and he had a mess inside. In his passenger seat was a woman who looked annoyed or angry. I assumed they were just hot because it was nearly 90 degrees outside. He was asking me if I knew where the mall was. Not the mall that is across the street, but there were a few shops independent of it that you had to go around. It's still visible by the naked eye though. I told him, yeah, just go straight from behind the school, make a right, cross the busy street and then make a right at the mall. He was acting like he didn't understand what I was saying and asked if I knew Spanish. So I explained in Spanish. Again, he pretended he didn't understand, so he asked if I could get inside the car and take him to the mall, and then he would drop me off at home. In my stupid mind at the time, all I thought was this guy is really annoying because you can literally see them all from here. I was also thinking that maybe I should take the ride home since I really didn't want to walk home in the heat. However, something inside me was telling me, no, don't get into this man's car. He kept trying to convince me, and the more he talked, the more nervous he got. Behind me, there is another car stationed next to a tree. Sometimes parents would wait for their kids a couple minutes before school was over. There was a woman in the car with her window down, just glaring at the guy. The guy kept looking behind me and at her. After rejecting him politely for the millionth time, he finally said okay, thank you, and he sped off. I thought about a weird guy and that maybe he's not from here, which is why streets are confusing to him. The lady behind me said, "Be careful who you talk to." I looked and awkwardly smiled and said, "Yeah, thanks." On my way home, all I felt was annoyance at the guy for interrupting me while I was walking home, and the lady was talking to me as if I didn't know about stranger danger. Years later, after listening to other people's stories, I realized that the man was trying to kidnap me. He was trying to get me inside his car, and the lady behind me staring at him was making him very nervous. The passenger woman was probably there to make kids feel more at ease, but she was probably annoyed that she had to be there. And maybe she didn't want to be there, or maybe she was in on it, I don't know. It honestly gives me chills to think they went to a school to try to pick up children. I wonder who else they tried talking to. There are parents and security around, which is why I didn't see him as a threat at first. But if it weren't for my gut feeling, I could have easily gotten in his car and disappeared. Also, that lady's presence really scared him off. So, I'm posting this for my boyfriend who doesn't use Reddit much. It'll be from his perspective. This may be short because he doesn't remember a whole lot since he was 7 at the time, and his parents never told him much, but I'm including the key details that he does remember. So, when I was 7 years old, I went to a small school in our little oilfield town in Alberta. There is this guy named Daniel. I don't know if that's his real name, but when I think of him, in my mind defaults to that name. Well, Daniel had slept with my mom ages before I was even conceived, and somehow had in his brain that I was his child. Full-blown delusional. So Daniel decided the smart and rational thing to do was to stalk me. Hardcore. He apparently plotted out a map to my school and he knew my name. He knew how old I was and he knew what I looked like. I have no idea how he got this information. My mom never really used Facebook and lived in a different province. I had never met this man before. Daniel decided one day to take it a step further. He had been ranting to his wife about me and kept telling her that I was his kid and that he was going to drive from British Columbia all the way to Alberta to come kidnap me and bring me back to BC with him. He was convinced that I was conceived earlier than I was, and I was his kid, and my mom made some conspiracy to hide the fact that I was his kid. He had a whole plan for how to kidnap me, down to the date that he was going to do it. His wife decided to call my mom and warned her, and my mom decided to put safety measures up like making sure I was in groups and I had to be home by 4 and so on. I was only told about all of this when I was about 14, and I still don't know all the details. Obviously, he never went through with his plan. So Daniel, who for some reason thought that I was his kid and planned to kidnap 7-year-old me at school, let's not meet. And just an update on an original detail that my boyfriend forgot to mention. Apparently Daniel wanted to kidnap him also to force his mom to get back together with him, despite his mom being married, and Tim also being married. What a creep. Okay, so let me start this off with a little bit of context. I live in Trinidad, so I might use some un-American terminology in this. I'm a girl and I was 15 when I was in 11th grade, 5th form, because I had skipped a year in primary school, so I was a year younger than most of the other kids in my class. When I was in that grade, I was not exactly the most healthy or athletic person, but I genuinely enjoyed PE class and I liked to run around in the gym and play games and such. So when I had to pick courses for semester 1 of grade 11, I made sure to pick PE just like I had done for grades 9 and 10. I was a little shocked when I got to the first day of PE, and I found out that our old PE teacher had gone back to Canada because his work term here was over. He had been with my school for 4 years, so it was understandable when someone told me that he hadn't gotten fired. So we meet our new PE teacher. He looks to be around 30-something, with light skin and blue eyes and blonde hair that was shaved on the sides and styled but short on top. A lot of girls immediately liked him and said that he was handsome, but I didn't see it because I wasn't interested in boys or men. This PE teacher liked to take us on walks and runs, so we would leave school at lunchtime in a bus and come back as school was ending, since PE was last period. One time we went to a place that was known for its holler monkeys. It was a paved path through the forest, and it went up and around a hill. We started walking, PE teacher in the back. When we reached as far as we could go in the time that we had, we turned around and started going back down the trail. I was slow and not very fit, so I was in the back with my teacher. The whole way down, we were talking about what we knew about the holler monkeys and the animals in general. I was an animal nerd growing up, so I had a bit of things to talk about. I was so happy to get to talk to an adult and have them take me seriously. I know it's kinda dumb, but I am the oldest grandchild to a very traditional Chinese grandfather, and I'm a girl, so not a son like he wanted. He pushed me hard to get good grades and never really wanted to talk to me, and my parents were always working, so I just wanted a grown-up to actually listen to what I had to say. On the bus ride back, I sat in front of the bus so we could continue talking. I only got more attached to him when he would let me talk his ear off about whatever I was obsessed with at the time, which was usually some comic book, TV show, or movie. I think at the time it was either Transformers or Pokemon, but whatever it was, he let me actually talk about it. I didn't see anything wrong with that at the time. I was always in the back of the groups during our walks, and so was he. I figured that we might as well chat. He liked to touch my hair sometimes, but I was used to that because my hair was so long that it went past my butt. After a few days of just walking and going places to do jogs, we played field hockey. We did it with 2 teams, and our teacher playing as just someone who would pick teams as he played, so he was kind of like a third team all on his own. He would help the losing team score points, and I don't think that it was a coincidence that the losing team was mine, seeing how non-athletic I am. It was during this game that other girls started to see something wrong with the way our teacher played. He would pat girls on their butts with his hockey stick in order to get them to jump or get startled, leaving the ball open for him to steal. The girls later were complaining that what he was doing was gross and wrong, but I said that I didn't see anything wrong with it. It took me time to realize that he really shouldn't have been doing that. The realization coming when he started to use his hand to pinch the girls' butts instead of tapping them with a hockey stick. Next thing I knew, the dude was fired. He didn't quit, he was fired. One of the girls must have told the principal or something, but I know that it wasn't me. I was actually so upset when he wasn't there anymore, and looking back on that and knowing that I felt that way makes me feel disgusting. So to my 11th grade PE teacher, please let's not meet again. Hi, and for the record, I'm a female. I'm turning 19 this year, and the story happened when I was 15. Oh, and also I'm from France, which can explain my English mistakes if there are any. When I was 15 years old, I just got into my junior year. I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story. Some information. I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account. And as a location, I said Paris because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have any followers, 20 or maybe 30, and I didn't follow that many people, so my TL was not really interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me quite a strange direct message. It was from a 200 followers account, and the message was, "Hey, my name's Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in blank because I will soon move and go to the town high school and I'm looking for friends." Blank was obviously the town that I lived in. I immediately thought something was wrong because there was nowhere on my profile that said where I actually lived. But after some time thinking, I remembered a tweet I made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city, so I told myself that he just searched the town name and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored and he was polite, and I answered him. I told him that I did indeed live in this town, and I went to high school there. The discussion was natural, and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions like, "Do you live far away from the school? In a house or in an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you. You're not often home alone, right?" I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately he didn't insist. Unfortunately because if he did, I would have probably blocked him. The next day, same thing. We talked a lot and he was still asking personal questions to get to know me better, and so I asked him too. And he always answered with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house though, because he didn't need to know anything. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything that I needed. Because I was bullied for years and even today, I still develop strong feelings, but most importantly, blindly trust people who are friendly to me. In France in October, we have a 2-week-long vacation, and the day before back to school day, he finally told me that he was coming to my high school because he had finally moved in with his mom, and he asked me a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to finally meet him, and I told him to join me in the hallway. But when he understood that there would be people around, he said that he would prefer an isolated place because he was afraid he would not recognize me and didn't want to spend the whole break looking around for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I was still in the school so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back to school day, I made myself pretty. I wore my best clothes and counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He was not a catfish and he looked quite like his profile picture. But I noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot, we got along well. I was so pleased, and at the end of break, he asked me to go with him to the fast food place for lunch. I said no because I didn't have any money, and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's a principle. He seemed disappointed but offered to walk me home after classes. I explained that I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed again, but finally accepted. And that's exactly what happened. and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the third floor bathroom during the morning break, and he walked me to the bus stop after classes. A surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways nor at the cafeteria, but I thought at the time that the building was huge and that there were over 1,500 students in there. So if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way that we could meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening, because my dad was abroad for work, my brother was always at his friend's house, my little sis was on a school trip, and my mom had to work late that very night. It was very reckless of me, but after weeks, I thought that I could trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got in the bus and waved at him and put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 5:45 in December, so it was already really dark outside. And as I got out of the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation in my stomach, and I felt like being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but kept my earphones in, so that people thought I couldn't hear anything. That's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, with no visibility on the big road the bus passed in. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood that I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well-intentioned. At least I could hear that he was not accelerating, so he wasn't trying to catch up to me, but I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran. I ran as fast as I could, the best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which by the way confirmed that I was home alone, and took a look through the glass panel on the door. It's not a peephole, it's a whole window, so if somebody wanted to see what's happening inside, they could. It was Rob, a few meters away, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was totally paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a minute, and when I took back control over my body, I ran in the kitchen and I got a knife, and I got back to the door. He was there too, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't happen. That moment when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break while he was kicking harder and harder, was the longest that I have ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped and got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and he got to the back door. He looked very angry, but then my neighbor's car reached my house and Rob ran away, probably thinking that it was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me 1,000 DMs before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought that I was done with the story. But quickly after, some accounts which have just been created followed me. Their ad names were all a series of numbers and the first letter of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one followed me. I chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop, and it was too much to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to the people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates because I haven't met him again in days, but not a single one ever heard about Rob. This guy was never a student in my high school. That's why I never met him apart from our daily meetings. That's probably why he seems so old. I never heard about him again anymore, and I'm still asking myself, what did he want and what could have happened that night? The first year of middle school, a lot of things happened that I believe really shouldn't have. About a month before school started, a day before my birthday, I got my period for the first time. I had called my friend a few days afterwards to tell her. I was a bit of an early bloomer, so I was one of the first in my friend group to start. Well, later on, this particular friend of mine and I got into a fight, and her retaliation was to start a rumor about me around the school that I was pregnant and had sex with a high schooler. Throughout the day, I noticed people giving me weird looks, and I had no idea what it was about until my friends told me. I came home bawling my eyes out, and my sister knew why. Being in a small town, rumors spread like wildfire, and everybody already knew about it. This girl at the high school my sister was at told her about it, and she went off on her. And this started a whole chain of events. Me crying, figuring out who it was, and my mom at the principal's not leaving until they promised to do something about it. It slowly started to get better, but walking home from school, I lived nearly across the street, became a hell. I never learned the guy's name, but the first day he followed me around on his bike with his best friend. They circled around me, so I had to stop walking, asked me personal questions, which I'd either stay silent or say something snappy, or just a bunch of things to purposefully make me uncomfortable. On the third day, he kept making sexual comments about me to the point even his friend said, "Too far, man." After that, he never had his friend with him. I just kind of broke down a few days after it happening. I was always a really shy, quiet kid. I spent most of elementary school not talking. I had no idea how to handle it, and I was scared to ask for help, because I didn't think anybody would believe me or not take it seriously, so I simply just didn't say anything. The last day of it happening, I think, was the worst. He had a group of girls behind him all cheering him on as he harassed me. One of them laughed and said, "You should stalk her," and he actually agreed with her. I finally had had enough, and I started screaming and cussing him out. He smirked and said, "Feisty, I like it." I just ran home. I was already at the halfway point. My sister was waiting for me at the front door that day with our dog, only a few months old, so she had heard the whole thing. She didn't do that often, but it seemed like perfect timing. She looked panicked and was just like, "Are you okay? Do I need to hurt someone?" and told me that I need to report that to the school. I said that I was fine and that it's taken care of. She was reluctant, but I let it go. He walked past my house and our dog jumped in front of him and started growling at him. He just chuckled, which freaked both me and my sister out. A few months before, our house had gotten broken into, and because I was home alone a lot, my mom decided that I needed a dog to protect me. She's a sweetheart though, and lets people pet her and everything. And that's why my sister would sometimes wait for me outside and let kids pet her. He was one of the only people that she's ever growled at. I'm really afraid that if I didn't stand up for myself or had a dog, that he would have followed up on the threat of stalking me. I only saw him around school a couple times. Once on the student news because he was on the football team and got this award. I almost started crying when I saw that. And then he went up to my lunch table because my friend asked him a question, and he stared at me the entire time. The last time I saw him was the last day of school. I was getting things out of my locker, and when I walked past him, his breath hitched and he just looked at me the entire time that I was in the hallway. There's a lot of reasons I hate that town, but after I graduated from 8th grade, he was the biggest reason why I didn't want to go to that high school there. I'm glad my mom accepted and we moved into the city. I've had to deal with my fair share of creeps, but he was by far the worst of them all.